I think my starting point is very much that local government has a key role to play, both as a provider of services and in its role of community leadership, to have a really meaningful role in the debates and the reality around big society. And I often hear myself say these days that if there were as many people doing things in relation to the big society as twittering and debating and writing about them, we would be even a huge step further. And I say that in no disrespect to the conversation today. But I think some of the action that's going on in the ground is really interesting to share and reflect upon. And I suppose I know that local authorities and some of you in the room this evening up and down the country are working really hard to begin to define and shape what the big society means in different localities. And I do think that is incredibly important in understanding the particular dimension that we're thinking about this evening in terms of equality and diversity. Because how you define the big society in a local area is definitely going to shape what actions and interventions are made, in particular to address issues around equality. So I wanted to share with you some of the ways that in Sutton we're beginning to define what the big society means to us, and that has been very much, as I say, shaped by the history of our relationships with our local communities, by our politics and by our relationships with the voluntary sector. And I'm pleased and not pleased in a sense to hear that Sutton is an outlier in terms of its relations with the voluntary sector, because one of the things you will find in Sutton is an even closening of the relationships between the local authority and our local community organisations. And part of that is because it's a very simple fact that people are engaged with things that interest and inspire them. And a lot of what is interesting and a challenge for them at the moment is how everyone is going to respond to the unprecedented financial challenges that we face. And one of the things we're trying to do in Sutton is make that connection between our work as a big society vanguard and those very challenging and difficult debates that we know we need to have with our local residents and our local community groups in terms of how we move forward to shape services around much reduced funding streams. And I think that is a real challenge, but there's some real things to be gained from pursuing that approach. So just to touch on, as I say, the ways that we've begun to define the big society in Sutton, and I've no doubt that this will change over time because it's not something that is a quick fix. I think part of the challenge is actually, in a sense, the cynical approach is this becomes like John Major's Combs hotline, and lots of us will remember those citizens' charter initiatives, and in 6 months' time we go, oh yeah, what was that all about? So I think there is a challenge to make it sustainable and meaningful, but part of the way to deal with that is about this local sub-definition. So a key aspect for Sutton is continuing work that we have begun some years ago about driving behaviour change. And Anna and I were just talking earlier about the work that we've done in relation to travel and travel options. And we really want to build on that and to see our big society work within that context of behaviour change. And it would be odd if I didn't mention with the weather today, one of the particular bits of work that we've been doing about that some of you may have heard already, is how we've transformed our approach to gritting pavements. You'll remember earlier this year there were loads and loads of stories about local government not getting its grit out on the roads and on the pavements, stories about people threatening or actually being sued, and everyone in local government was looking up to see what the case law really was in the High Court about who could sue who if they tripped on their pavement, if they put their grit out. I mean, a load of rubbish really. But what we've done in the past few months is actually distributed grit to our residents so that we are actually enabling them to, quite freely, grit the bits of pavement outside their homes, and if they need to take the grit for their neighbours. And it is the test of that is happening today and tomorrow. But for us, that was a way of encompassing lots of our ideas and thinking about the big society, both in the way of promoting behaviour change, of people looking outwards and thinking about their neighbours and other residents, and actually it was a cheaper way for the council to achieve those objectives. So big plank in terms of behaviour change and different ways that that can continue in different areas. I think the next area really is all about how a local authority can best devolve decision making to the lowest possible level. Unlike many other local authorities, we've had a series of local committees that have had devolved budgets to make funding decisions with residents about different aspects of public realm. And there is no doubt that the funding decisions that have been made by our local residents are different from the ones that would have been made had they simply been made in our council chamber. Except we don't have a council chamber in Sutton. I think we're one of the few that don't. And that in itself, I think, helps to create a different platform in terms of people working with the council sometimes. So we want to develop further the work of our local committees, see how more funding can be devolved to them to further promote devolved decision making. The next area really is one that's been touched on in terms of even closer working with our voluntary sector, but also with our voluntary sector and with our local businesses. And I think one of the areas that's probably a little unexplored so far is the relationship of the private sector to the big society. We've had a couple of quite interesting meetings in Sutton where our local businesses have met as part of their Chamber of Commerce work, and they've been absolutely inspired to think about the ways that they can contribute to the big society and what it means for their work. And in some ways it's a restating of what we used to talk about as corporate social responsibility, but I think it's an area that we need to think about further. The next one really is about cutting red tape, and I think in local government in Sutton we know that sometimes we're as much the problem in terms of people, where's the problem and where are the solutions. I think you know, we're all part of the problem and all part of the solutions at different times, and we're very committed to cutting our own red tape to make sure that our residents can actually find it easier to be involved, find it easier to find the routes through what's happening in a local council. I think the next area in terms of what does it mean for Sutton is about thinking about new models of service delivery, and we're especially interested in how social enterprise can play a bigger role in the life of Sutton in terms of providing services and the sort of social capital glue that can be built through that work. And that's an area where we need to learn from others in terms of making sure that we're creating the conditions for social enterprise to thrive in Sutton. And I suppose finally, it's this area of openness and transparency. The council, like many others now, has put details of spending over £500 online. There's no reason why major charities can't do the same, and I hope they will. But this is really the beginning of a sea change for the council in terms of open data, of making sure that we're making information available for others to manipulate, to reveal new insights. So all of these areas are ways that we are in Sutton beginning to define what the big society means. And I think in all of this, we're thinking more and more about the outcomes and how we can evaluate them. And one of the key things for us is that in all of the work we're doing, we want to make sure we've targeted our effort with communities that need it most. And I think this in a sense goes back to the evidence base that we need to shape the work. And it's very interesting when you look back at the research, the borough-wide surveys that we've done over the years, we can clearly identify those communities who do feel less involved, less empowered. And so what we want to do is try and make sure that we're targeting our efforts with those communities. And it's very interesting in thinking about the new wave of community organisers. Some of the work we've been doing in the northern part of our borough, which is our more deprived area, is some work with a campaign company that some of you may have come across that was really pioneered in Barking and Dagenham to try and build a new way of communicating with our residents on a peer-to-peer basis, and actually building a network of people in that community who are the ones who actually give a damn and are pretty nosy and like to know what's going on, to find new ways to share both details about what the council is up to, but even more importantly, to get feedback from those residents about the things that are bothering them most, which in a sense in turn helps us understand best what is most motivating and engaging people.